Edgar Cayce's Jesus the Pattern and Christ Consciousness. Compiled by Catherine C. Arnaud. Part 4. 1927. In the application of the abilities, is to ever use same, that same may serve the needs of those first who seek to know the living principle of the higher forces, or God. Then, in the application, seek first those things that pertain to the individual's needs of self-application in those higher elements of the truth as set in him. For in him is the light, and the light is the light of the world, and it shineth unto the dark places. For as an ensample came that light into the world, that man, the helpmate of God in his creative forces, might give that reflected light back, in its glorified form, rather than being dragged through the muck, the mall, the slime, of degraded influence. Then, in such application the entity will find, not only the needs of the flesh, the desires of the heart, but the satisfaction of the life well spent, and will then be called to that higher force known in him. Applying self, then, to those things as are set in him, there will come those greater influences, through this application. Only in him in whom there was found no guile, and though he were buffeted by man, though he was ridiculed by those in power, though he suffered among those convicted of crime in the flesh and railings against their fellow man, yet those tenets as were proclaimed by that as the man, making self as the Son of Man, and through those conditions became the Son of the living God. In these tenets, in these ways and manners, may such conditions be brought to the realization of those that would build an invisible empire within the hearts of men. And seeking then the way for each one, as would head each organization as would be necessary, there would be seen that in a short while, there may be brought into realization that would be able to rule. Not as an iron rule of the oppressor. Not as one seeking to subjugate others to the will. But making the will one with that universal force as is necessary to bring everyone to that throne of grace, of faith, of hope, of love, of all those conditions necessary to build hospitals, churches, roads, loans, and help others to help themselves. What would be the first steps necessary to take to form such an organization? First, the choosing of those who would give self in holy communion with this one purpose, and, making self right with God, choose to be used as an instrument of good for the saving of the good in human principles. For, the world awaits the coming of those who will proclaim the day of freedom from the bonds of those who would rule, either through prestige or through political influence. Then, one so chosen by their fitness, as will come through such communion, will be the first to begin. For, as each are chosen, through these same forces there may be given their perfect fitness for such elements. For, as in this, as these seek, let's give to each their place, their niche, their abilities, their conditions, concerning such ideals. To some these are as ideals that may be used for their own personal gains. To others these are as ideals that will be as benefits to the world. We are speaking of individuals, as individuals. First, in Edgar Cayce, we find one lowly in heart, ever seeking to do good, as good is understood by the individual, and willing ever to be used as an instrument for the speaking of those in whom such elements of an Arcadia have been the dream of their earthly experience. Giving then to those in charge, or as directors, that individual information necessary to meet each and every condition as arises. In 287 there is found first that necessity of making self's inner self one with that creative energy that would make an answer of my spirit beareth witness with thy spirit, O God, that I am thy son, and willing to be used as an instrument of good toward the giving of mankind, the opportunity to know the will of thy son, as may be manifest through my activities toward my fellow man, in carrying out that which will become the crowning glory of my life, and my service to my fellow man. Laying aside those things that so easily beset, and I will run the race as is set before me in him. And that is seen in 943. That ability to defend those principles as may be given for the direction of such conditions as are necessary to make such elements feasible, plausible, workable and applicable in the lives of individuals chosen as channels through which such information, such monies, such positions may be obtained, that such may become possible. Keeping self ever in that way and manner. In that of 4825 there is seen the ability of the use of power and of principle, yet that inner self must be made over again, as it were, in that oneness of the purpose as has often been said in self, yet find self oft and anon forgetting the way. Keep each not as religion, but as the dictates of the heart to guide, direct, the fellow man. For before each there is set a way, and in that way, is set a light. Veer not from same. Let him that is weak of mind or heart not take the handle, for he that plougheth and looketh back is worse than the infidel. As given, this may be outlined. These are worthy, will they make themselves one in the purpose as set. For many peoples, in many nations, in many climes, are ready and willing to follow that light, that star. In that of using the physical prowess, and in the abilities to use same, and apply same in the lives of others, these may bring to the entity the moral, the physical, and the spiritual development, to lead on to higher, better, and ennobling influences in the lives of others and for self. But set first, that ensample as is seen in him who went a doing good unto those whom the body came in contact with. For in him is the way, in him is the light, and he that would set him as the ensample will renounce self, in that the aggrandizements of selfish motives are the undermining influences in good, whether for the physical, the mental, or the spiritual bodies as are manifest in the physical plane. Then be guided by that ennobling influence as is in his way. Keep self in that way, that leads to the better understanding, and in the application of these principles in the present physical experience, there will be brought the greater influence, the greater good, for others and for self. Voice. You spiritually know yourself to be. Again that from within of the self-consciousness of the entity gaining more and more the knowledge of those conditions as are being presented to the entity from time to time, and, as the entity finds self applying same in the life, in the manner, in the speech, in every walk, more and more does that from within, and those forces as would direct, give to the entity the more perfect understanding, and the more perfect poise in its greater sense, to the entity. Be not overcome by such, but rather apply such in an humble, contrite manner. Remembering the pattern in him, the master, for though without sin, yet took he the burden of all, in that he made himself of no estate to gain the more. We have the information as transcribed here. This, as we see, while not in the way and manner of being all that might be said respecting this individual entity, was given, and has been given, that the entity, studying and applying same in the present experience in the earth's plane, might gain the better concept of that which will's influence plays in the individual development. For, having the urges and the desires placed before self, and the cause of same, through karmic influence, one may apply, will one but take that ensample as was said in him who made himself of no estate, that he might gain the more. Using, then, this life as an ensample, one may apply. Even as this entity may apply these conditions in the earth's experience and develop toward that mark of higher calling as is set in him. For it is not all of life to live, nor all of death to die. For one is the beginning of the other, and in the midst of life one is in the midst of death. In death one begins in that birth into which the earthly application of the inmost intents and desires is applied in respect to will's forces, that given by the creative energy, that one might make self equal with that energy. In the one before this, we find in that period, when much change was coming to the peoples through the study of the mysteries of the ages past in that land now known as Egyptian. The entity then among those that followed close in the study of the sciences called astrological or astral science, and many copies of that compiled by the entity, may yet be found among Egyptian writings, or portion of same, in those tombs near Memphis. In the urges is seen that undecided relationship between mystery, religion, faith and trust, hope, and prayer. The unstableness of the urges brings much trouble sometimes to the entity, and the lack of confidence, lack of faith, and the inactive forces toward setting the standard in him that made the way clear for those who would follow in the path that gives rest in mind, rest in body, and the satisfaction of the life well spent. In abilities, many are seen as given, and the field lies mostly in that of music and training of those who have talent. Do not lose patience, or self, in those who may not attain. First and foremost, the entity needs to find self lost in him who gave, "Come unto me, and learn of me, for I am lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your soul." Learn what that means. In the applications of self, then, keep the way straight. Keep the path holy, and keep self nearer and nearer to the way that leads to better understanding. As is seen in that of travel, or communication. Of the various conditions arising from same. These may be seen in all their glory, or in all their blackness. Depending upon the attitude of the individual towards that comparison as is being brought forward. Yet there is seen in the various conditions. Whether pertaining to that in which there is the exercising of the forces from the cosmic plane toward material, or material towards the cosmic forces. That there must be one set as an ensample in the manner, way and force of expressing same. Then the mind rises in its attitude towards that would bring to all those full forces of the ability to apply that in will in that is opposed, or in the manner of bringing better conditions to the body, if will's force applied, making will one with that element that gave to the forces of the world, that necessary element to bring all to that throne of grace in which man comes in the closer communication with the creative forces in the material or cosmic, or the superconscious forces of the universe, and in this relativity of conditions, in that he that gave self as the ransom is able to keep that committed unto him against that day for every individual who puts their trust in him. For in him comes the way and the light, and the expression from him, that I will go, I will meet, I will give. That rise of expression in the hearts of men, showing to this body, that spirit is alive in the world today, even as on that glorious morn, that he broke the bonds of death, and rose on the morning light to the Father, that gave all to this world that men, through him, might seek that way of escape from the fleshly lusts, that beset in their various ways. For, as is seen, to the entity there is again in this vision, that approach to the throne itself, and unto him is committed that in and through his name, the name of the Son, that all may approach to that throne of grace. Who was that young man, that personality of the central core, that in earthly form, manifested as a man called Jesus, or another entity of the spirit plane representing self as that which each of us potentially is, that which internally is Christ. That same is seen in that, how through this one individual, one with the Father in him, overcame the flesh desires, and through that made self one with the Father, and through that same application bids all come unto the Father through him. That is experienced in the flesh was as man, and as man he became the Son, that man, through him, might be sons and heirs with him of that position, oneness with the Father. I beheld a round sort of light of darkened hue, set rather high up. I knew it to be another consciousness, for I felt my own, to be a like condition. The other said to me, all things are set in me. All things through him are in me. Then I beheld the Master, the Christ, pass in white flowing robes. He seemed to understand the needs of my understanding much better than any of my previous interviewers, for he lifted me up and showed me exactly what this me meant. Myself, this conscious light, that I felt to be me, rose up to join him, and I felt that which was in him to be me. I joined him, and became conscious one with him such, that all things in me being in me myself, although I felt his relationship to my consciousness, but both of us were filled with the same knowledge, that composed the fully developed me or I. Next came the application, and here again the Master understood my desire for specific instances, to show me how better to apply my knowledge. We were in a Palm Beach hotel, full of wealthy influential people. I walked down the path with some who spoke and joked of women and I joined them. The master passed before me and out of the gate. I should have followed him, I know, but instead remained with these people, to whom I said. I don't know anyone here, but I used to. I used to chase around here with Robert Lehman, thus trying to make an impression on my friends about my previous influential companion. Then I jumped over a ledge to join a friend of mine, and in so doing damaged some of the green leaves. A man came up and chided me, at which my friend said. Why let him talk to you, a guest, that way? I went up to my critic and asked him if he owned the hotel and what right he had to speak to me, a guest, in that manner. He said that he had some interest in the hotel and, as he seemed to have so many other more important guests, told me to pack up and get out. I felt humiliated. Prior to this I wanted to spend the afternoon boat riding with some child, but could not because the boat was already in use and the child riding in it with its owner. In this we find again that presentation to the entity of that light as has been given that the entity would gain more and more consciousness of, as the understanding, the seeking, and the application of self toward those truths and lessons gained would bring. In this present vision the entity realizes, sees, understands, that as was given in that message as the Master spoke. Seek me and I am with thee. Where I am there ye may be also. Greater things than I do ye shall do in my name, and, as the vision progresses and the entity loses that companionship, thee is shown that would the entity gain that full consciousness as is seen in that vision, shown by the vision. And also there is shown the forces as constitute the conditions in the material plane. Again there is set before the entity that same law as was given of old. This day I have set before thee good and evil. Choose thou. Choose thou. For in the vision there is experienced those vicissitudes of the worldly conditions, even in the higher social position, and the attitudes of many. Also when the entity would seek to do good without the full companionship of him who gave that, lo, I am with you, even in that there comes the loss in the ability to apply the desire. Yet, as is seen in the vision of life itself, and of the oneness with that ruling force in the Master, then the entity is to choose within self the way, the manner, in which the entity itself would serve. Whether it is better to be cast in the ways of peace from within, or to enjoy the pleasures of worldly desire for season. Apply then, and more would the light, the force, the power, all in all, be presented. Speak and I will hear, for I am not afar off, but within thine own heart, would man but hearken to that call. Was my impression on awakening from this vision correct? In so far as same is in keeping wholly with that is given, correct? My one question is. Am I correct in my deduction, that my interview as a disciple to the Master? That is, was actually an interview with the Lord? The Redeemer? Or am I deluding myself, for it would not be the first time my mental consciousness has risen into the very holy of holies. For it has been given, that I am one in Israel, whom the gods have given again the approach even to the throne. Am I correct, or do I go too far, for my interviewer comprehended perfectly my mental needs? This is as the direct application of those truths as have been given the entity from time to time, for does not the entity gain that differentiation in the presence of the seeking for the Master, and for the pleasures and the interests of making the good impressions in the world? As the impression is felt from within of the presence, and as the impressions are attempted to be made from within of the spiritual understanding, that the social position of the physical being has reached to such proportions, just the same, and in just the same status and manner is this true. For the Spirit of Christ abroad in the world seeks to be the indwelling factor in the life of those seeking to be like the Master, see. As predicted in reading 900-347, it came. I seemed to pass through many stages or experience many elements that compose the thoughts, that is, application of the human mind. There was lust for money, sex lusts and lusts of other kinds. That is, seeking to gratify various desires of the flesh. There was the desire for travel. Or I noted myself seeking to return from a Fort Wayne trip, we are planning Thanksgiving. Then my mother seemed to kick my brother in the face, which he resented. I put my arm about him and tried to make peace. "See how I have forgotten and forgiven," I said. "Yes, but your trouble is past and now doesn't seem so important," he replied. "I know that is true," I replied, "but come on, be big about it." Then I passed through a dark cellar and up into a lighted room where I beheld Mrs. Berliner, just deceased and for whose soul I had prayed for that night, seated with many others. I felt her presence a previous afternoon while writing. Following that was a quarrel. She said to me, "I will not have discord in my house. I will not have lack of harmony and trouble there." Then I saw many in the borderland whose mental application and physical endeavors in the physical had held back their potential development. I asked, who will bring them back? Then a change. I felt and saw as I had once before, when my mind rose into the Holy of Holies, even unto the throne. I beheld him as a young man this time. He was naked to the waist, yet I saw not below the waist. I asked, who is that young man? That, I was told, is Christ. Who will bring them back? I asked again. Christ spoke to me directly, saying but 2 words. He said in reply, "I will." In this we find there is sufficient matter for study in the many various phases of the entity's endeavors, and the entity's writing, and the entity's mental, physical and moral experience, and the manner as the various phases of this vision present to the entity are those various phases of the development of the entity along the various phases of the truths, lessons, understandings, and the great truth as is the culmination of the thought in that scene in the latter portion of the vision. In the first we find the fulfillment in time and in manner of lessons as have been presented to the body in this very definite way and manner, and these are all to be studied from that vision of self from within out, rather than from out to the within. Though we find there is the reasoning from within and the reasoning from without, though we find there are those direct or elemental conditions in the physical presenting various phases of conditions as are experienced through the mental mind. Only gauge all then in its proper sphere, and in the various phases of the studies made by the entity, realizing that all is gained by comparison, and that in the subconscious, or in the cosmic plane is made, as it were, a counterpart of that seen in the material plane, and that there is no condition, element, or thing that may not be found patterned in the material or mental consciousness. In the vision as regarding that of those things that bring about the various forms of desires in the flesh realm, in each instance there is seen the lack of will's force being manifested in the proper direction, or the improper application of will's force as respecting that in the material or mental plane. In the forces as applied in the various phases of self-indulgence, finds its expression in those conditions in which, though loving hands would mete out that diametrically opposite from the ordinary conditions in life, so each becoming in this manner the expression in the comparative degrees of those things experienced and studied in the various developments of the mind. As is seen in that of travel, or communication. Of the various conditions arising from same. These may be seen in all their glory, or in all their blackness. Depending upon the attitude of the individual towards that comparison as is being brought forward. Yet there is seen in the various conditions. Whether pertaining to that in which there is the exercising of the forces from the cosmic plane toward material, or material towards the cosmic forces. That there must be one set as an ensample in the manner, way and force of expressing same. Then the mind rises in its attitude towards that would bring to all those full forces of the ability to apply that in will in that is opposed, or in the manner of bringing better conditions to the body, if will's force applied, making will one with that element that gave to the forces of the world, that necessary element to bring all to that throne of grace in which man comes in the closer communication with the creative forces in the material or cosmic, or the superconscious forces of the universe, and in this relativity of conditions, in that he that gave self as the ransom is able to keep that committed unto him against that day for every individual who puts their trust in him. For in him comes the way and the light, and the expression from him, that I will go, I will meet, I will give. That rise of expression in the hearts of men, showing to this body, that that spirit is alive in the world today, even as on that glorious morn, that he broke the bonds of death, and rose on the morning light to the Father, that gave all to this world that men, through him, might seek that way of escape from the fleshly lusts, that beset in their various ways. For, as is seen, to the entity there is again in this vision, that approach to the throne itself, and unto him is committed that in and through his name, the name of the Son, that all may approach to that throne of grace.